It's hello, kids. Stop. You're fine. You hit the right play button. You're at the right spot. Welcome to the Ingle Angle Podcast, the finest podcast with that name. I am Fort Worth Star-Telegram columnist Mac Ingle, and I want to get to a couple of things before I introduce today's special guest for this episode. Very special guest, I might add. We're doing these now with video. Before, when we first started this podcast a few months ago, it was just audio. Now they were like, hey, no, see if you can do video too. I was like, oh, okay, I don't like being on camera, even though I'm a damn handsome man. But I'm really paranoid and self-conscious about this part of my hair because I'm noticing I'm 49 and I'm pretty sure I'm starting to lose it in the back. And I am not happy about this at all. So I'm a little self-conscious about it. And I need some product. I need some gel or something like that on the left side. Just keeps sticking out. Anyways, let's move on to more pressing issues. On a serious note, I really want to thank the nice people at Fort Worth Weekly Magazine. They featured me recently in their Best of 2022 edition. Anytime somebody says you're the best of anything, take it. Embrace it. Enjoy it. Celebrate it. Most days, people really don't care who you are or what you did. If they do, they really just want you to get out of their way and or for you to give them money. So if somebody takes the time to say that you're great at something or you did a good job, tell them thank you and enjoy it. Fort Worth Weekly was kind enough to say that I am the best sportscaster, sports writer in DFW in 2022. Humbly, they're right. One more thing I want to talk about real quick before we move on to our guest. And that is, I want to give a shout out to my older brother, David Ingle. David Ingle, I think he's 57, 58. Anyways, he's the crazy person who earned his PhD in the classics from the University of California, Berkeley. It's a pretty good school, junior college-ish. David was actually in a tenure-track job at Penn State University, where in his third year, he quit. This guy earned his PhD in the classics, only to quit 3 years into a tenure-track job. Tenure-track job is like a Supreme Court justice. You are bulletproof forever at a pretty good salary, teaching to college kids. And he quit. He quit to move from State College, Pennsylvania, to be with his wife in Pittsburgh, where he takes a job basically as a bank teller. And he does that. Anyways, it worked out for him pretty well. He's become a very successful financial advisor, and now he lives with his wife and their two daughters in Philadelphia. Oldest daughter's now in college. This week, the reason I'm giving him a shout out is that this week he completed a cross-country bike ride. And I'm not talking like Andorra, Belgium, or some of these fake 8-mile countries that exist all over Europe. He pedaled all the way across the United States. He leaves his house in West Philadelphia, doesn't go out of his way to slap Chris Rock, and he rides more than 4,000 miles on his bike by himself, not in a group, to reach the Pacific Ocean in Oregon. It took him about 40 days, give or take, and he actually finished not too far from where Lewis and Clark wrapped up their trip, which occurred, I think, a little bit more than 20 years ago, give or take. Anyway, congratulations, David Ingle. That's a hell of an accomplishment. It's quite inspiring. If he can do it, you can do it. I probably won't be doing it. Guest for this episode is someone I am lucky to land. This guest is one of those crazy people when you see her on television, especially where she goes, you immediately think, wow, that's insane. That doesn't look very safe. I hope she's okay. She's okay. This woman is fearless. She's a badass. She's a total pro and a heck of a reporter. She currently works as a correspondent for ABC News. Before moving to ABC News, she worked at CBS News for more than 15 years, where she covered, amongst other stories, hurricanes, COVID vaccination efforts, the sexual assault allegations at Fort Hood. Again, lots of other stories she covered nationally than just those. She also worked in the Dallas-Fort Worth market at KTVT, the CBS affiliate. She has won multiple Associated Press awards, as well as 3 Lone Star Emmys. She's also a proud mother of a young son. With ABC, you are likely familiar with her work on the topic which we will discuss now, the United States and our border with Mexico, and whether America indeed has a border crisis. Here she is, let me see if I can get this right. I don't think I'm going to get this right. Mireya Villareal. The reason I wanted to have you on was a non-red or blue look at the status of the immigration issue in the United States, because it comes up mostly as a weapon during political campaigns. And what I've consistently seen is that I don't know what to believe. I've been to the border out in West Texas a couple of times, but nobody's out there. I mean, there's nobody there. But you've gone to places where you can actually see it and report on it, and you've lived it in a way for a number of years. How many years have you been going down there to do stories on this?
Oh, well, it's funny because I am a border kid. I grew up in South Texas, in a town called Edinburgh. And so I kind of have grown up around it for the most part, but it was never at this level. But I would probably say I've been covering the border as a journalist since I kind of started my career, which is, 15-ish years. Yeah, we're not going to go into the details, but let's just say around 15 years. But I would say more extensively when the Trump administration took over, 6 to 7 years, give or take. So, yeah.
So, Mireya, is there a crisis at the border?
Well, first of all, can I tell you something really quick? Can you just adjust? Can you say Mireya?
Is that how it's pronounced?
Well, it's actually pronounced Mireya, but a lot of people
let me see if I get. No, I want to try to do that. So how do I say it the correct way? Mireya.
Mireya. Yeah. So let's just say, for purposes of North Texas and for most of the country, Mireya is totally fine with me. Mireya.
Yes, I'm going to try to get it. I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to try to get it right. But
I don't think it's. Listen. Doable. It's okay. No, listen. It's funny because I'm still very good friends with Doug Dunbar. I was over at CBS DFW for a long time, and I was totally okay. He doesn't. It's Mireya. Totally fine.
So most people don't think my name's Mac. It's Matt, M-A-T-T, or Mark, or Max. Those are options 1 through 3 before they're like Mac. No one's named Mac. So yeah, yours is a totally different deal, because I'm sure, like, do native Spanish speakers get it right the first time? Do they immediately know?
Yes, for the most part. Mireya, yeah. Sometimes it's a little bit. I'm surprised sometimes, like when I go to San Antonio and I tell them my name, and they're like, "How do you spell that?" I'm like, "You're Spanish." But all that to say, yeah, I would say, I think just in general, if you're not Hispanic, you do have a tough time. But Mireya is totally fine with me. I just tell people, like, not Maria. That's the only thing you cannot do. Maria.
Okay, Maria. Okay.
Feel free to ask me the question again, by the way, which is, I think you asked about crisis of the border.
Yeah, because it's the headline you always see, right? It's the easy search engine optimization headline that you'll see either on television networks or online and Instagram or Twitter. Crisis at the border. You've been there. Is there a crisis at the border?
Listen, there is what I would call a temporary crisis. And why I say it like that is because it moves depending on time of year, depending on what political party, or for that matter, what state has taken this up at the time, where the drama is. So I think the crisis is do we have an immigration problem? Yes, absolutely. But when you use the word crisis, I think that's meant to put fear into people and to make them think that things are out of control. And for me, and what I've experienced, especially over the last 6 to 7 years, is that the crisis is where you shine the light, if that makes any sense.
Is there any way to report on it without the audience immediately thinking that the reporter or the network, the platform immediately has some biased bent in either direction,
Mm.
and that the audience is left thinking, well, I can't get a straight shot on this because this is way too right or way too left.
For me, what I tell people all the time, and it's not just because I've worked at these two networks, but I think for me, you have to take a hard look at the kind of news that you're watching and where you're watching it. And so, I think that if you have certain political, beliefs, that you search for the news that you want to hear and you want to know about. So, and it's totally fine. I mean, listen, if you want something that is what leans one way or another, you know where to find it, and I don't need to tell you what those are,
Right.
but I will also say that there are a lot of places where you can find very unfortunate, the way I'm going to put it, but very bland, down the middle, straightforward news. And sometimes I think that does hurt what people say, like, oh, you're just doing it for ratings. And the reality is like, if we were doing it for ratings, you would take it from one extreme
Right.
to the other, right?
Yep.
So for me, I think that there are places that you can find reputable, legitimate information coming out from the border. And for me, obviously, I not to sound biased, but yeah, I do think that ABC is a big place where you can find that. There's no benefit for us to play one side up over the other. But it's inevitable. And I think a lot of that just comes from people having very strong feelings about this issue.
I remember listening to Ann Curry speak at a symposium that was hosted by Bob Schieffer at TCU, and she was talking about how now in television network news coverage, we know, or the networks know exactly what the consumers are watching and when they're watching. When certain story goes on, they turn off. When certain stories goes on, they turn it on and they watch. No different than my industry. Everybody's tracking everybody now. And her reference point of that, as regards to that, was the war in Afghanistan. People just were checked out on it. We have seen this issue about immigration played up by the Trump administration and his campaign for several years now. From what you can tell, are people still engaged in this story, or are they doing what Ann referenced, which is they're just moved on to something else?
I think it comes in waves. And I think it's all very dependent on who is raising the flag of like caution, the flag of crisis, right?
Right.
I think that when you have, a Governor Abbott that is obviously said he knows that this speaks to people, right? He knows it speaks to his base of people. He understands the strategy that he wants to take, and for him, this is a big one, right? So he's definitely going to wave that flag out there, and I think that for his base of people, it is going to grab your attention. But for the general public, do I think that this is something that will make you tune in tonight on ABC News, WFAA? I don't know. I don't know if it moves it, but I will say once the momentum starts, for example, we've seen the busing of migrants happening here in Texas for now, I think it's over 2 months. But it wasn't until recently that momentum started to gain from how the strategy changed. So you're no longer just busing migrants to Washington, D.C. Now you've added the New York factor. Right. And what you do by that is, listen, in my opinion, this is a political strategy that worked in Abbott's favor. I hate to make it sound like this is all just political theater, because there is real news happening along the border that needs to be addressed. But a lot of this is showmanship.
One theory that I have heard, and I wanted to test this out with you, we've obviously, one of the big deals that we have seen now in the last year or so are places of work trying to find people to fill jobs, right? And the most common excuse we hear is people are staying home and just living off government, essentially welfare checks, or the extension of PPP loans. And nobody really looks into it like, oh, okay, people are just making more money drawing unemployment than they would if they went to work as a waiter at a restaurant. So somebody who's close to me, who's in finance, a pretty bright man, has a PhD, said, what nobody is reporting or acknowledging is that the reason why these jobs aren't filled is because the Trump administration did such a good job of restricting immigration and changing its immigration policy is that those people who normally would be here for those jobs and take those jobs and work in those jobs aren't here anymore. Do you think that's true or not?
So I think that is partially true, right? I definitely think that the problem when you're talking about immigration, right, is that you're not just talking about, like, in order to really talk about the problem, you can't just talk about what happens at the border, right? Even though the border wall and migrants crossing over the Rio Grande River, I mean, that is just the flashy video that's going to, get you to tune in. But the reality is like, the conversations that people don't have because of what you said right now is that, like, it's not sexy to talk about this stuff. But yeah, you need to talk about the jobs that, migrants, come into the U.S. and help us with, and also like the federal court system, right? How backed up it is. But when you talk about jobs, I do think that is something that people don't realize is happening. A lot of these people that are coming over, they're coming over to work, right? They're not coming over to sit here and wait for their asylum cases to be heard. But unfortunately, that is exactly what's happening. The way the law is written right now, the way the policies have kind of been worked out, when you're coming in to have your asylum cases heard, you don't have the opportunity to apply for all of the necessary documents that are needed in order for you to work as a citizen here in the country, or just work in the country, right? So this idea, like, that you're going to get a temporary visa and all these other things, like, it doesn't work like that for everybody, especially when you're talking about the jobs that you just mentioned, which are like, I don't know, you could talk about field work, you could talk about waitressing, basically kind of these low level entry jobs. If you're an engineer and your company's going to sponsor you in from, India, that's a completely different conversation. Right. But if you're talking about people that are coming across, the border, and they're waiting for their asylum cases to be heard, those people legally cannot get work. However, I am aware of business owners in the DFW area that have said, we need these people because, you know what? The regular person out there living in DFW doesn't want to work at the car wash,
right,
at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it's 110 degrees outside. But you know who will? These migrants that are trying to and navigate the federal court system, the asylum process. They've got to provide for their families here. They do not want, because also on the flip side of it, they possibly be asking for some sort of assistance. They don't, because they don't even want to go down that road, because they don't want to hurt their chances of getting asylum. So what do? They, under the table, are getting paid by some of these businesses so that they can work and provide for their families.
When you look at the immigration issue, and I think Donald Trump tapped into something, I'm paraphrasing, but he said it, why do we get all these people coming in from, these are his words, and I know you know the quote I'm going to, these shithole countries, right? And it does seem to me that he tapped into a feeling I think a lot of Americans think, that why are these people who don't look like us coming over here? In your mind, when he said that, as much as that probably irritated you, but when he said that, did you think that tapped into this sort of underlying fear that a lot of Americans have about immigration, that those who are coming in, we don't really want you, even though you just said something that is inescapably true? They're the ones doing the jobs that we need to have done because we don't want to do them.
I think for me, listen. Did former President Trump create the problem of how we feel about migrants in our country? No, I don't think he did. What I think he did was he made it a little bit more acceptable to talk about the process and these people and these countries in a way that probably wasn't as respectful as we would like a president to talk about these places. And then what that did was that set an example for other people around the country, regular people like you and me, to talk this way about people, about migrants or asylum seekers. I think for me, again, it is tough because, I'm a parent. And when I go down to the border and I see a 6 or 7-year-old kid, like, in front of me, crossing the Rio Grande River, their parents, you got to think, as a reasonable human being, nobody would put themselves or their children in that kind of danger if it wasn't the last resort for them. So while I can appreciate that maybe, I mean, do I think that he could have chosen his words more wisely? Yes, I think Trump could have done that in a lot of situations. But when it comes to these asylum seekers, these migrants, I certainly think that how he approached them wasn't necessarily wrong. It just wasn't done in the right way so that people can truly understand like how bad it is in those countries. So, again, it's almost like I agree to disagree with him.
You reported on the construction of the border wall, which was a big point of emphasis during his campaign. And my prediction was that they wouldn't finish it, and that eventually erosion, and then eventually some future president would make, a big stand-up photo op of taking it down. Not not the same, but the same imagery as, say, another wall that was built in Berlin and that came down. And this was going to be about immigration and building a bridge and one people and all that. It's 4 years, 5, 6 years later after all that started. Where are we on that process? Is it just the bridge to nowhere?
Pretty much,
Yeah.
pretty much. I think what's interesting is that like when when I was starting off my career down in South Texas, there was all this conversation about building up the levees, right? And about
Yeah.
how important it was because at the time we were very vulnerable down in South Texas to all of this massive flooding as we got hit by tropical storms and hurricanes. But when you sat back and realized what was really happening, that was another administration basically building a border wall, except they built it with the caveat that it was levees and they were meant for that was meant for flooding. But the reality was is that this border wall has been built and has been under construction for decades now. The difference is that Trump really found something that spoke to people on one side or the other. um, he allocated millions of dollars to try to get the wall built completely because there are gaps in the border wall. Honestly, construction along the border wall has stopped completely. I don't think that border agents are all that frustrated with that. I think what they are frustrated with is that they don't have money right now to hire more agents, to gain more technology. To them, I think the wall is what it is at this point, but we're in a time and space where technology is way more important than that physical wall being there. I mean, honestly, that's just kind of a physical deterrent that you can see in front of you. It doesn't do as much as what people might think.
If a family wanted to cross illegally today in Arizona, California, Texas, wherever, do you think it's any tougher today than it was when you were a kid growing up on the border?
Um, no, I don't think it's any tougher. Um, I think what we've done is that we have a lot of policies in place, a lot of laws that are very confusing, and we're really not enforcing any of them very well. There's not enough federal judges around to hear all these asylum cases. And so, then these cases linger for years. And so when you hear Trump, for example, or anybody, any politician saying, well, these people don't show up to their court cases, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I am saying, well, listen, after 3 years of waiting to have one of your initial hearings heard, I mean, what do you expect? The system is messy and nobody that is the problem because if you do, the multi-billion dollar industry that you have created around the immigration issues in the United States will start to unravel. And then a lot of people will be affected.
Is there any nation? I understand this is a hard question in the sense that the United States is a nation of 335, 306 million people, and every other country that has different immigration policies probably is going to be a lot smaller. I know, Australia has unique immigration policies. They're pretty restrictive, and they're dealing with those issues. Then you have other countries in Europe that have very restrictive immigration policies, and that's created a lot of problems. Is there any country that you look at and say, that's a pretty good one? They get it pretty close to right. Or is the fact is there's just no apples to apples to even do that?
I probably would agree with you in the fact that like I'm not really sure anybody has it completely right. I'm not really sure anybody has the perfect strategy in making immigration work in their countries, honestly.
When you watch news coverage of immigration stories, because you've been down there and you've lived it and covered it for as long as you have, what do you come away with thinking that are the biggest misconceptions that people have about this issue?
Huh. It's funny. I actually think the biggest misconception for me is that people don't think because it's not happening in my backyard, it doesn't affect me.
Right.
We ended up in Uvalde because while there are a lot of very democratic counties around the South Texas border, Uvalde and Uvalde County skews a lot more conservative. And at the time, their mayor and their city leaders and county leaders were asking for more help from both federal and state agencies. Governor Abbott had been down in Uvalde quite a bit. They were the center point of a lot of his "we need more help down here" kind of conversations. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that even though Uvalde is about 70 or so miles away from the border, they were getting a lot of the residual chases and foot traffic. And at one point, I think there were even buses being taken from the border into Uvalde, and migrants were being dropped off in that city. And so, again, you have a city that really says we have nothing to do with immigration.
Right.
And then once you connect the dots, you realize that a lot of the conversations about why maybe a lot of local officials didn't take what happened in Uvalde on May 24th, the shooting, so seriously, was because initially a lot of people thought it was just another bailout having to do with immigration. So again, it sounds weird to put the two and two together, but I do think you may not think about it, but whether it's that conversation, whether it's the job conversation, whether it's, resources federally going to immigration and, asylum seeking courts and judges and staff. I mean, all of that does have a direct effect on us. And I do think that we should have this bigger conversation. I think, unfortunately, I'm not sure people are willing to listen and have those open conversations right now.
Two more things, I'll let you go. Having grown up there, you've seen how it's changed. And, I have a good friend who grew up in Brownsville. His father was a border patrol agent, customs. And from what he's described, and I remember going down to visit him there back in the mid 90s, you could go back and forth to Matamoros. It was no big deal. And now he says people really don't do that anymore for different reasons, not immigration related. That was more crime related. But from how you've seen it all evolve and change, especially in South Texas, is it really that much different, or is it kind of still the same?
I think it's considerably different. I mean, to your point, I mean, I used to go over with my family all the time. We used to go eat in a little town called Progreso. And a lot of this really started to get out of control, not because of immigration and issues with immigration, but more because of drugs and cartel violence. That being said, while drugs are still a huge issue, fentanyl is a huge issue right now along the border being crossed from Mexico into the US. I think that the cartels have a very big stronghold along the border, and they are not only in control of the drug routes, but also the human smuggling routes as well. And so, yeah, I definitely think a lot has changed along the border. And I would caution people if you don't need to go there, I'm not really sure I would suggest you walking over without making a big plan of it.
Last thing I want to ask you, if a voter, not a voter, just citizen, consumer, neighbor comes to you and says, I want to learn more about this subject, so I feel like I know what it is that's going on, but I don't have all day to do it. People are busy, and kids and jobs and, YouTube. Where should they go to? I mean, and seriously, all this junk is just a distraction, and it takes away from things that we know we should be doing, but we don't. So where should we go to consume that, to be up to date and more educated about it, without feeling like whatever we're watching is just so polar opposite and colorized in the name of grabbing ratings?
Yeah, that's really tough nowadays, because I will say even some of the even some of the agents that are heading up a lot of like these, you would think, right, that federal agents down along the border, it would be great to kind of tap into them and understand where they're coming from. But you're not going to get a lot from them right now. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security is extremely quiet about what's happening immigration wise. The Biden administration also has not been very open to discussing issues along the border, good and bad for that matter. I think my best advice would be to find someone that speaks to what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, individuals versus bigger platforms. Of course, you know what you're going to get when you're watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox. I would think ABC and CBS, we all have very distinct personalities. But I would say try and find people, whether it's, some people might say like, oh, I found the best YouTuber who is this great journalist. Great. If you trust them and you think they have the experience that speaks to this issue, great. But what I'm saying is find that individual journalist or reporter that has been down there, that has seen it with their own eyes, that has talked to more than just one side or the other. I know that takes a little bit of digging, but I think you can kind of understand. There's a lot of great reporters who are doing some really strong work along the border. Some of them work for places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, of course, ABC, CBS, NBC. But they are individuals. I mean, I'm not saying go jump on to one of the shows. I'm saying follow someone in particular and really kind of dig into their work.
Okay, last thing I'll ask you, real quick. Yeah. What's your biggest on-air screw up that you ever had?
I know this is going to sound really weird, but I don't think I really have one.
Better be careful. Knock on wood.
I know. Knock on wood. There have been a couple of times that I've messed people's names up. A couple of times that I've obviously but I haven't fallen. I haven't said it. I have a real bad pirate mouth, like a potty mouth, like bad. And I haven't said any bad words yet on air. Yeah. Although I will say there was one time in San Antonio where we actually had to it was during Fiesta. They have a time called Fiesta and everybody gets really crazy drunk. Yep. And there was a lot of people behind me that were really drunk and we had to make friends with them. And I just remember two drunk guys being behind me as my security guys because we had nothing else to convince them to do. But as far as like anything major, I don't remember anything. I mean, I've had a couple of times that my hair is like sticking up and things like that, but so nothing yet, but I think you just jinxed me. So thanks a lot.
Right. That is a big knock on wood. Hey, listen, thank you very much for this. I've been a great admirer of your work for a long time. I tell you a quick story because you'll laugh about this. So about four years ago, maybe 3 years ago, my Twitter account got hacked. And all these people kept sending whoever hacked me, and I was really nervous. I was hacked, and it was I was part of a big group of people, media professionals who were hacked, and I was panicked. I'm like, oh my god, what's in there? They got my phone, they got my computer. What are they going to see? And so I get back into it, and I see whomever has hacked me was DMing a lot of people, and one of them was you. And the link was, here, open this. And you asked the question, what is it? And whoever it was that had hacked me responded. And then you said, no, I don't think so. And then that person said, like, go fuck yourself or something like that. And I was mortified. I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. So I'm calling all of these people that we know mutually. And I'm like, do you have her number? Do you have anything? Do you have an email address? Anything? I didn't send her. I would never send that. And for the longest time, I don't think I ever got to you. I don't think I ever reached you, but I was in a total panic about it. I'm like, I didn't send that. I'm like, I'll send a lot of things and I'll say a lot of things and I'll stick my foot in my mouth, but I would never have sent that. So it took several months and then you followed me again on Twitter. I'm like, okay, she knows it wasn't me, but I was always very worried about that. So for you to get over that, even though it wasn't me, to come on here, I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I love when I can kind of hang out with other local journalists that you obviously make a huge impact in the community. I think you do a great job. But yeah, I definitely held it against you for a little bit, just so you know. No, listen, it was weird, but it all got itself solved and figured out. And I'm glad that you were able to kind of take care of it. So
thank you. Well, have a great fall. And best of luck to your son, and please travel safe and take care of yourself. I'll be honest, I see you go someplace sometimes and I'm like, man, I hope she's careful because it ain't worth it. They ain't paying you enough. No, and I know you. I know you do it because you love it and you're really good at it. But I know you go some places sometimes, and I think sometimes as a journalist we kind of fool ourselves. I don't say this. I say this as a profession. I think I've done it. I've been in places that might be a little dangerous, and I'm like, well, I'm okay. I'm just doing my job. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. If you're in a dangerous place, you're in a dangerous place. So I see where you go sometimes. I'm like, yeah, I hope she's careful because you just don't know. And so I am concerned for any journalist out there who puts themselves.
Well, yeah,
Go ahead.
no, I just said thank you. I said I appreciate that. I know, I think even my mom worries about me still. So,
Oh, I bet. I bet. Well, listen, I really appreciate it. This is very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mac. We'll
Okay.
talk to you
Okay. Take care.